Shock horror. New statistics show that asylum seekers over the last 4 years have killed or injured more than 1,000 people across Europe. The Heritage Foundation, which is a Republican or at least conservative libertarian think tank in Washington, D.C., has found that over the last 4 years, 32 Islamic terror plots have been connected to people who claim to be asylum seekers. Now, that's about 16% of all terror attacks. Now, this shows us there are two problems. This is true across Europe and particularly true across the UK. Now, first off, it shows that Islamic State fighters are claiming to be fleeing war and prosecution and are entering Europe as refugees and asylum seekers. And this isn't the migrant crisis we're told about. The migrant crisis we're told about is innocent young people and innocent mothers and innocent families, etc., fleeing civil war. We simply know that this is no longer the case. And I reported on this story a few months ago, actually. We know that ISIS is now plotting to flood Europe with fighters because ISIS is being crippled in the Middle East, partly because of the strength of Donald Trump's administration, his armed forces policies. But you know, the media all over has had to admit the fact that actually ISIS is now, almost publicly admitting that they're going to start flooding Europe. And The Guardian reported on this, saying, Islamic State commanders fleeing Syria are conspiring with extremist groups in Africa to foment and infiltrate a new migration wave destined for Europe, the head of the UN World Food Programme has said. David Beasley, a former Republican governor of South Carolina, said Europe needed to wake up to the extremist strategy in the Sahel region. Those forced out of Syria were uniting with local terrorist groups to use a lack of food as both a recruitment tool and a vehicle to push millions of Africans towards Europe, he said. So while this is a significant threat and something we should be concerned about, and certainly something that should result in a change of policy for national governments across Europe, when you see a number like that, surely the government has to stop and think maybe we're doing something wrong here. But as well as that being a serious threat, we've also got to acknowledge that actually the 16% figure is one thing, but the fact is most of these people committing these terrorist atrocities across Europe are from Europe, or at least they were born there or live there. This is a domestic terror threat for the nations of Europe that should really be considered. These fighters are already in Europe, they're already pouring their way in, but they've been here for a very long time. And we know in the UK there's between 25,000 potential terror threats on our streets right now. This isn't some dystopian prediction of the future. This is the right here, the right now. Potential terror threats who are going out buying the halal sausages from Tesco right now, walking past your kids' schools right now. This is happening right here, and it's a domestic terror threat. And interestingly, between the years 2015-2016, 7,631 people were referred to the PREVENT program. PREVENT's a government initiative that tries to stop young people, or people generally, from being radicalized into some kind of extremism. And it deals with all kinds of extremism. But interestingly, of those 7,631, Islamic extremists made up 65%. 65% of people referred to the government's counter-extremism program were Muslim. Is that not telling? Most interestingly, actually, is that most of those people were under the age of 30, because what we're seeing in Europe, and even in the UK specifically, is that with every new generation, the radicals increase. So even 10 years ago, we saw this. So 10 years ago, studies found that 40% of Muslims between the ages 16 and 24 wanted to live in a Sharia-governed Britain, but that figure was only 17% for people over 55. Now, I say only. Obviously, 17% of people wanting to live in a Sharia-controlled Britain from a small community is a problem. But 17% of over 55 compared to 40% of 16 to 24 shows that the newer generations are more radical, and that's a threat. That same year, it was found that 36% of 16 to 24-year-olds believe if a Muslim converts to another religion, they should be punished by death, but that figure was 19% for over 55. So this is a two-pronged attack, and it's something that we've got to acknowledge. It's something the governments have to acknowledge. The data from the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. shows us there's a significant problem with asylum seekers. But I think the subtext here, the real story here, is the fact that most of these people come from The The news from the Heritage Foundation that 16% of all terrorist atrocities committed in the last 4 years across Europe were connected to quote-unquote asylum seekers speaks volumes to me. You know, when we have a government in the UK that allows domestic terrorists to go basically unchallenged, to live underground, to commit terror atrocities and then to not be blamed for it afterwards, and we also have a government that's importing terrorists in the form of asylum seekers from all over the world, I have to question the intentions of my own government. I have to question their own sanity. The Daily Mail reported terror expert Robin Simcox of the Heritage Foundation think tank in Washington, D.C. said it was disturbingly simple for jihadists to hide among genuine refugees because the continent's borders were under huge strain. And yet not only is our government welcoming these people in, they're trying to distract us by talking about the threat of right-wing terrorism, believe it or not. Well, the figures show that actually it's not the problem the government is telling us it is. The facts show that Prevent, the government organisation that stops extremism, between 2016 and 2017, took in 61% Islamic terrorists or potential terrorists, but 16% were connected to right-wing extremism or terrorism. The numbers show the facts. We know the government's lying to us, and these figures from the Heritage Foundation show us that it's not just asylum seekers that are dangerous. We are growing terrorists within Europe who are going out there and killing us. If you like that and want to see more, remember to like and subscribe and download the new Rebel app from the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store.